Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. We are really grateful for your presence. My name is Paola Gomez, and I am Muse Arts Program Director. Welcome to Happening Multicultural Festival, the first and only festival created by community artists and fully, entirely planned, produced, and dreamed of by artists with experience of relocation, immigrant, newcomer, and refugee artists. Today, we're having a very important conversation, the power of collective voice in music. I wanted to welcome you, and I wanted to also express that this event is dedicated to Jorge Lopez, a musician, an artist, and a guitar player who is part of the Happening Multicultural community. Jorge has been part of Happening from its very beginnings in 5 years ago. And today, and for the last 8 weeks, he has been fighting for his life at the intensive care units at the hospital here in Toronto, fighting COVID-19. So I wanted to express my appreciation to his family and the deep gratitude we have for him, and we wish full recovery very soon. With this, I want to also invite into the space Anthony Johnson. Anthony is currently working at Factor Canada as the sponsorship and outreach coordinator, and he has a long title there, which he will share with us very soon. But I wanted to welcome Anthony into the space, and in addition to that, wanted to create the opportunity for us to learn more about what it is to work in collaboration and have collective voices in music. Anthony, thank you very much for being here. Same as all the panelists. The space is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paola, for this introduction. Thank you for having me here. I'm really happy to be moderating this event tonight. So before introducing our great panelists, I'd like to start this with a land acknowledgement. So we recognize that we live and work on traditional Indigenous territories. And I acknowledge that I am currently located on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I wish to express gratitude to Mother Earth for the resources we are using. And I would like to honor all the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people who have been living on the land. And I'd also like to add, this is a festival that essentially, is for, well, honors refugees, immigrants, and newcomers. And I think with that, it's really our responsibility to continually educate ourselves on the original stewards of this land, and always do more research to honor the people who were here first. And now I'd like to introduce the wonderful panelists. So we will start with Mercedes. So Mercedes has contributed to the success of multiple arts and nonprofit organizations. And for the past decade, Mercedes has been the artistic co-director for Sunfest, which presents global arts programming in London, Ontario. And she is now head of programs for Small World Music. Thank you, Mercedes, for being here tonight. You can put your camera on. Now, Ruben. Ruben is a JUNO-nominated multi-instrumentalist, producer, spoken word poet, arts educator, and community worker. As a musician, producer, and spoken word poet, he leads New Tradition Music, performing regularly in national and international festivals. As an arts educator, he's designed courses taught at Canadian universities. Hello, Ruben. Awesome to have you here. And Menon, born in Guyana, Menon Dwarka returned to Canada after almost 20 years in New York City, serving as music program director for the 92nd Street Y, Harlem School of the Arts, and Greenwich House. And Menon has also led several Canadian organizations, including 918 Barfirst, Arts at Tobico, and Soundstreams. Hi, Menon, awesome to have you here too. You can also turn on your camera and unmute yourself. So for today, really, we're going to do this in a very conversational format. So I think we should start with having each panelist kind of give an introduction, a bigger one than what I just did, and really talk about, your journey and also, just your organization and what you do. So Menon, how about, can we start with you?
Sure. So my journey is pretty complicated in the sense that my family came to Toronto in the very late 1960s when the city was not a multicultural center. And I grew up here really almost without a community. There were hardly any Indo-Caribbean people here and almost no Guyanese people here. And so my way of kind of fitting in here was through music, through high school music and learning guitar, classical guitar. But, at some point I went to U of T for my undergrad and really felt that there wasn't a future for me here. So I applied to a bunch of graduate schools in New York and went there and thought I'd be there for a couple of years. And those couple of years turned into almost 2 decades. And a lot of really interesting things I think happened that have informed my work since I've come back. So right at the end of my studies, I had an organization reach out to me to help them with a project for a TV ad. And so, I didn't know anything about computers or studios or anything like that, but they knew I could write with a pen and paper. So they brought me in and I helped them. And they ended up winning that job that they brought me in. And they said, what do you think about sticking around and continuing to do this? And I thought, well, I didn't feel really comfortable, I have to say, in academic music as well, for lots of different reasons. But I felt here was a group of people who had very eclectic backgrounds and wide knowledge of music and operating at a very high level. So I decided, sure, I'll do this. I think I found my home here. I get to write classical music, which I was trained to do, but I could write heavy metal, I could write country, I could do anything. It was really what the client asked for. And then 9/11 happened, and then a writer's strike happened after that, which took fees in that world down to about 1% of what they were when they started. And they've continued to drop ever since. So, typically a fee would be between 30 and 60,000 for a 30-second spot at that time. And now I think people get, they get paid in the hundreds for this work. So as that world collapsed, a colleague of mine from school was teaching piano at 92nd Street Wide. They said that they needed someone to help them with an electronic music studio. So I went and did that. And again, I found a home in community music. But for me, Anthony, I think what's really important that I had to build community for myself because my immigrant experience is so much earlier than the most recent wave of immigrants and newcomers. And then in 2012, I got a phone call that my mother was very sick. She died about 6 weeks later from pancreatic cancer. I'm the oldest son of a Hindu family, so I packed my bags and came home to look after my dad. And of course, what I found here was a much more diverse city than when I left, but also a city, I think, still struggling to find its specific identity. And I have to say that one of the things that having lived in America for so long, is I'm very hypersensitive to when we are simply acting as a colonized community, reflecting trends and things that are going there, versus what's going on here in this city. If you look at the economic, social, racial, and religious mix here in Toronto, where we're having this chat, it's quite different than most American cities. So in the work I've done with 918 Bathurst and Arts of Etobicoke and Soundstreams, it's really been about trying to get what Toronto is now in reality reflected back to itself. And of course, because I've done lots of admin work since I began my journey, that not so much as a composer or musician per se these days, but more as a person who informs these groups how to gain resources, how to actually put on shows, how to get grants, hiring them to do shows so that we can put them forward, and trying to get the city fathers, as it were, people at City Hall and foundations and the granting to fund these things and to be see them as for what they are, really the voice of Toronto and the voice of Canada. So maybe that's enough for this initial part, Anthony. Maybe I'll stop there.
No, this is great. Thank you for sharing that. Honestly, there's definitely a lot of points that we're going to get back into later in the session, but really what you said about us finding a voice for the Toronto community, that's really very inspiring story. So thank you for sharing. Okay, now let's hear from Beny, Ruben. Same question. Could you talk about your journey and what you're doing currently?
Peace and much love, everyone. I'm saying hello from Jane and Finch, North York, Takaranto, Dish with One Spoon, Treaty Territory. I was born in Colombia, in present-day Colombia, and I come from a family of artists and artist educators. I was born in a neighborhood, a really famous neighborhood in near the downtown of Bogota called Policarpa, Salvarrieta, which is named after a heroine in the times of independence in Colombia. And this particular neighborhood was established by landless indigenous peasants and mostly women who were displaced as a result of a war, a bipartisan war that was taking place in Colombia during the 50s called La Violencia. And it was, the people who came together to establish this community, they took over land that was built beside a hospital, the hospital where I was born at, called La Ortua, and they did it strategically. They waited, when for example holidays were taking place and the police was preoccupied, they would come in with tents and set up tents, and it was a long resistance that took place between the people and also the police until the mayor had to I guess say that the neighborhood was a self-determined neighborhood. The water, they were able to intercept water pipes from the hospital and have their own water, and so it's sort of a really important story for me and also for my family, because that's where I was born. That's where my dad grew up, and it informs a lot of also the work that I do and the work that I represent. So fast forward, many years later after I was born, the situation in Colombia continued, situation of civil war, and my parents, being activists and artists, had to leave Colombia due to threats for their activist work. And while we were in Colombia, they were involved in a lot of workshops and dance and theater workshops in different communities in the outskirts of Bogota. So I was able to experience and witness the strength and the importance of arts in the building of communities. So that's something that I always remember and always have with me. So when we arrived here in Toronto, it was through music that I was able to kind of deal with the issues that come with arriving in a new place and not knowing anyone and having to just leave the way that we left, right? The typical newcomer experience and refugee experience. It was music and culture where I found myself, and I was able to express myself. I was quickly drawn to hip hop culture, also because in Colombia I grew up around it as well. And it was, through the artistic elements and the artistic expressions that I was able to sort of, learn about also the importance of culture and finding oneself and identity. So fast forward a couple of years more, I went to an art school. I began to play music. I taught myself how to play percussion because I actually used to go to different rehearsals. My cousin was already here in Toronto, and he's also an established musician. His name is Diego Marulanda. In the 90s, he was also nominated for a JUNO with his band called Pacande. So I would go to his rehearsals, and that was my school. I would kind of just pick up a percussion instrument and start playing, and until I got the approval and the blessing from the elders. And it was actually with these people that I later began to play professionally at the age of 17. So I went to an art school. I did music there. Then I went to university, and I did my undergrad in music there in the world music program. Then I started my master's, and I began to teach. I began to teach different studio courses on percussion. And my master's program was in ethnomusicology. And then I went back to Colombia to study, and I continued my studies, but it wasn't until my PhD, when I was doing my PhD, that I began working full time in community, in community spaces. I had always grown up in different community spaces here in Toronto. So, for example, in Keele and Finch, there's a cultural center called Caxaj, which I had been doing a lot of cultural work there since the early 2000s. Even in the 90s, I was doing a lot of work with an organization called UNILAT, United Youth of Latin America. Then at Caxaj, then I did some work at the Center for Spanish-Speaking Peoples at Jane and Wilson. And then at San Romano Way Revitalization Association is where I began to do music studio work, working in different studio settings, where the youth who were coming in did not have access to recording equipment and also mentorship. So it was there where I began to do some of the most important work that I'm currently doing. A lot of the youth were using industry instrumentals to create their music. So at the end, they weren't able to own their music. So the first program was on beat making and getting the artists to learn how to create their own compositions and then put out their album and then be able to register their album and do performances. And I put together a whole curriculum that allowed the artists to create an EP, market their EP, and at the end do a final CD release / graduation. This was supposed to happen for 3 years, but it only happened for 2 because there was a labor dispute in the organization. Working conditions were really bad, so the workers from the different programs got together and tried to unionize. But the organization was led by a politician, and also the board of directors were really wealthy property owners, so they stifled the organizing of that union. And that's when we started to realize, okay, the issue of space is something that we have to address, because how can someone just take the space away from the youth, such an important space? A lot of the youth artists were left without being able to complete their projects. There was also issues with that have been happening for a long time in Jane and Finch, of tensions between the different neighborhoods on a street level. So a lot of the artists do not collaborate because there's the anxiety of having to cross borders, invisible borders, and go to neighborhoods where there's tension. So that was also an issue. So what I'm currently doing is, in my work as a community worker, is we put together a mobile studio project where we go across the different neighborhoods. One day we're on one location, the other day on another location. And the idea is to create collaborations amongst artists who usually would not collaborate. And also the issue of space is not there because it's mobile, so we're able to set up in different places. And this is one of the projects that I'm most proud of, that involves collaboration. But aside from the music, the community worker role that I play, I also I have a project called New Tradition Music, and that's the one that we've been nominated for a JUNO for, and I'm about to put out an album. And I also do a lot of arts education work in schools across Toronto, with organizations such as Caxaj, Children's Peace Theater. I'm a partner with the TDSB as well. And I also produce and compose, and so I wear a lot of different hats. But that's basically my story. Thank you.
Oh, this is great, Ruben. Thank you for sharing that. From what I gather from your journey, I really love the fact that you found yourself through music and then went on to learn more about it, and then went on to now share this knowledge with, other people who could benefit from that experience. So yeah, this is a great journey, and I'm excited to dive into it deeper in a bit. And now, finally, I also want to ask the same question to Mercedes. So same thing, could you describe your journey and what you're doing currently?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Itawandaron, and Wendat peoples, also otherwise known as London, Ontario. And that's a big deal because it really has to do with a lot of my journey. I come from a family of refugees originally from Guatemala, and they came in the 80s, and my family settled here, and my parents and my brother. And, growing up in London was a very different experience to not being able to find a lot of the immigrant communities that you would typically find in Toronto, for example. My parents wanted us to have every opportunity that we could. So they put us into French immersion school, which not a lot of immigrants were doing at the time. And they wanted to ensure that we did that. And so therefore we went to a very, all white school and community, my brother and I. So we were one or two of 6 kids in a school of 400 kids that were not white. So it was a really interesting growing up in that environment. My family, family of musicians, music appreciators, teachers as well. And so we grew up with music in our household always. Something was always playing in the background. I'm also a trained musician. I don't perform, but I've always worked somewhere alongside the cultural or the music industry. And largely thanks to my father, because he started an organization called Sunfest, or the London Committee for Cross-Cultural Arts. And, I've been growing up with that my entire life, specifically and precisely to present and to have a platform for the immigrant communities, the immigrant musicians that were here in London and surrounding areas at the time. And also just to create a space that in a community such as London, Ontario, where sports or commercial acts were largely prioritized, in order to have professional musicians come and show their culture, show their music, show their traditions, and new traditions as well, was really important in order to not continue those types of events that just stereotyped communities, Ukrainians with little red boots, or, Mexicans with sombreros. So that was very important to ensure that those distinctions were made and that the voices were heard. So what we created was a free and accessible festival called Sunfest, and it's grown to be the largest festival in southwestern Ontario. So everyone is welcome from every socioeconomic, cultural background, and it's largely been lauded as the most inclusive, family-friendly event in this area. So we're really proud about that. But specifically myself, as much as I've been working on that my entire life, sorry, I just heard somebody. Sorry, I just heard something come through my speakers here. I don't know. And so anyway, so I started working on that. I have an education background. I have my master's in French linguistics, and I also work in marketing as well. I have a degree in marketing as well. I wanted to ensure that I was, promoting as much culturally diverse work as possible. So I worked with a few organizations, theater organizations and music organizations in Kitchener, Ontario, Waterloo, Ontario, as well as London, and continued my work here. With Sunfest, I'm the co-artistic director. So programming as much diverse music as possible was very important to me and to my family, and to continue to work and provide that platform as well. With that, we've created partnerships all over the world, in Colombia, Korea, in, all over Africa, all over Asia as well. So we're really excited about that. And with that work, with the partnerships that we've created with other cultural institutions and organizations here in Ontario and Canada, I started to work with Small World Music. And so last year, as part of their Global Toronto Conference, they brought me on board to be a jury member in order to work through the selection process of the artists that we're going to be showcasing, as well as the rapporteur. So I attended the entire conference, and I made a speech with essentially was the bookend of the entire conference. And from there, they offered me a position to be head of programs. So there, what I do is I'm the lead on the Global Toronto Conference for this year, which happens in 2 weeks, and as well as the Emergence program, which will be starting back up again in September. So yeah, so that's essentially me. That's what I do. I want to make sure that all voices are heard. As always, that's the priority. I want to make sure that we have equal representation. We have equitable representation across a lot of our institutions. And here in London specifically, I'm part of several boards to ensure that that is happening. So, I've recently been asked to be part of the Tourism London board, and that's a big deal for me because largely a lot of the events that they support are not culturally diverse by any means whatsoever. So I'm excited to continue my work along there. And I'm excited to be part of this panel. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Thank you, Mercedes, for this introduction. I really love this message that you're essentially saying right now of the need to really, keep being inclusive and make sure to always have spaces for all kinds of people, for everybody. So, thank you for that. And one thing that I noticed, there's really a common thread among all three panelists here that I heard is this theme of building community for yourself, because finding yourself in a place where there aren't necessarily events or spaces, and essentially creating it yourself and then starting to collaborate and getting more people part of that. So I'd love to dive a little deeper into, I guess, the importance of that and also the process of how were you able to do that. So Menon, could we go back to you and hear your perspective on that?
How one builds community?
Yeah, and the importance of it as well.
Well, the second part of your question is pretty deep in the sense that I remember hearing a psychotherapist say that there's no such thing as a baby. There's only a baby and a mother. So we because a baby can't survive without somebody to help. And I think sometimes in our travels and our studies and trying to make a life for ourselves in adulthood, we often think, oh, well, if we're strong enough and we're tough enough or hard enough, we can just make this. And it's totally against the nature of who we are as a species and how we survive and how we think. None of us, I just want to add that even though we're talking about music, none of us create the language that we speak, right? This is a communally created way that is non-regulated, right? Unless we're talking about, very specific examples like Francophonie in France or in Quebec, no one's regulating this thing. So we're all doing it together, right? So we just take that as a premise, Anthony, that we don't do anything without community, right? We can't grow, we can't live, we can't learn, we can't speak without community. So I think to the first part of that question, how do we build community? It's an interesting thing, and one that I've had to encounter both from a professional, well, we need people to show up to the show, we need this very practical thing, to my own personal life. We often speak in very broad terms about what constitutes community. We usually talk about nations or race, but I think the thing that actually connects us as communities is very, very small. That, when we think about probably the most important influences, some of both other panelists have talked about their own families shaping their musical journey, that I think that's where we begin with our family. The very few people that actually connect and talk to us. But when we start to make real, robust communities, oftentimes, if you look at, I was lucky enough to work in two of the world's most creative neighborhoods, Harlem and the West Village. That, how did these communities build themselves? through going to church together, by hanging out late at night and drinking together, by going to tiny hole-in-the-wall spaces to hear incredible musicians do their thing. And I think it really is trying to build out a physical location where people can come together. Now, I know that in this past COVID time, we've had the opportunity to build community in a very different way, right? Through streaming and through gatherings. And I think we're still learning how to do this. In some ways, people are drawing from real 3D, real world connections and pulling them online. How we build these things in a kind of a digital realm will be interesting to see. But you know, the thing I want to emphasize here is that while communities can be built out of large bisectors like race or nationality, oftentimes when you drill down into those things, the things that bind those communities together is pretty superficial, because all the people in China or all the people on the continent of Africa or most of the people in ancestral Europe, they don't think alike. They don't have the same taste. They don't do things the same way. In a mono culture, you still have people hating on their neighbors and getting angry at people in traffic and everything, right? So I think as creators, one of the things we have to do is open the door wide enough so anyone who feels this music, whether they are ancestrally entitled to this or not, we got to invite them in the tent. If someone is, you know, really, really, really interested in a kind of music that doesn't pertain to their ancestry, and they have the proper respect and the proper connection, we got to invite those people in, because it's that kind of openness that's going to create real communities on the ground. And you know, I'm hopeful that post-COVID, a place like Toronto, the communities who actually live next door to each other, right? The communities that live next door to Jane and Finch, or the communities that live next door to Rexdale or to Regent Park, whatever, that these communities actually start to cross-pollinate, because that's when something new happens, right? So I know I'm taking up a little bit of space here, but I just think it's important that as people who are trying to develop a community, that yes, we can think about race, yes, we can think about nationality, but keeping a door open to people's hearts, that's how we build community, because those are the people that keep that community going on once the band leaves. The difference between a community and an audience, I'll just say this last thing, is that an audience disperses when the show is over, but a community remains, always remains. And it can be, you know, this year's festival, next year's festival. If you have a community, they're going to show. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Honestly, I don't want any of you to apologize for taking up space, given that you're saying things that are really good and insightful for everyone listening. So don't apologize for that. But yeah, no, definitely what you said firstly about the fact that there is no humanity without community, so important. For everyone to keep in mind, but also the thing about having an inclusive approach to music and always letting people in if they're interested, and that's the first step to community. Absolutely love that. And that's also really the essence of the goal of this panel too, is to talk about that the whole power of collective voices through music and community. So with that, I actually would love to jump onto Ruben's perspective, specifically on that topic of using music to build community, but also solving conflicts. Ruben, could you share a little about that?
Yes, for sure. So I go back to my project, the project that I'm working on, the mobile studio project. It's we've been able to use music as a tool to create dialogue, as a tool to create understanding, for people to actually get to know each other. How can you love your neighbor if you don't know your neighbor? So that, I think that is a very important part of community, is actually identifying what are the different struggles that affect a common group of people, and how do you get involved together to address those problems and solve those problems. So you know, in my community, there's been that issue of space. There's the issue of the different tensions that happen across neighborhoods. So music has been huge in order to create bridges amongst people that didn't really know each other and would not normally collaborate in projects because of the different politics that exist within the community and the different divisions that exist within the community. So it's being able to create those bridges, not just amongst the people who you know are part of the neighborhoods that have those tensions, but also artists that are doing other things that are not involved at all. So in the program, you know, there's artists from you know, that are really young at really early stages of their musical career. There are artists that are already elders that have a lot of experience, and so there's also different genres of music that are a part of the project, and people are able to kind of see what each person is doing. There's artists who are doing socially conscious music that are not involved at all with the politics that go on. So when all these people from different perspectives that are also a part of the community come together, there's a sharing that happens, there's an exchange that happens, and there's an understanding that eventually takes place, which allows those tensions to be erased, and also the not knowing, the ignorances to also disappear, because now people are coming together and they're seeing the things that makes them that brings them together, not the things that divides them. So you know, that's how I feel music has been important in creating community and building bridges in Jane and Finch. I think there was another question as well. I don't know if I answered both of them.
Yeah, no, you pretty much answered it. Yeah, so really the fact that music is something that gets people together and lets them focus on the similarities instead of the differences. That's exactly what we were looking for. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Mercedes, I'd like to also hear your perspective on that. And also if you'd like to share a little bit about not only building, but also maintaining community in the age of COVID, especially right now, because we were talking earlier about having physical spaces, and now the fact that we're doing things in a digital space. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Sure, yeah. I think with both organizations, Sunfest and Small Worlds, I think that's what I admire the most of working for them or with them, is that it really is about the music and the artists of really building that bridge with the audience as a community in order to be a community builder. And, you know, that physical space is truly important because over the years we've seen how people come together and they celebrate together and find happiness and positivity and overcome any kind of stereotype or, you know, I remember one year we presented a band from Israel, and, you know, you have, you know, Israelis and Palestinians in the crowd together partying and dancing. I mean, that's, you know, those are things that you see and you say, this is why I do what I do, and this is why I continue to work in this, despite all the barriers and challenges that could that arise from being in this type of industry. And, you know, I think it's really important to continue the work, as you say, because, you know, even in this time of COVID, I mean, I think it's been a challenge for any arts institution, regardless of the type of music or art that you present. But in order to continue that work was important to serve the communities that you typically serve, because otherwise we're just going to be filled again with more commercial music or more colonial type of music. And so therefore we have to continue to do what we do. And so with Sunfest and Small World Music, we have been continuing to do online programming, putting artists to work, ensuring they have spaces to record in safely, of course, and ensuring that those live streams and those broadcasts are free. You know, we don't want to put in some kind of registration or payment barrier, because all art should be accessible regardless. And of course, even throughout the year, we put on events and concerts that might be paid, but by no means will we say no to anybody who wants to come on and that can't necessarily afford it. So those are things that people need to keep in mind, that arts need to be accessible to everybody, and through the arts, and especially if they're free or at least affordable, that we're continuing to support those growing communities, and in order to create a space for them to really feel like there's an identity for them. Because, for example, myself, as I was mentioning before, in London, I didn't necessarily find my Latin community, you know, when I was growing up. It built over time because, you know, as more immigrants and refugees came in, but it was through the music that we presented, or the music that I went to see, that's where I found my identity, and that's where I found where it was, okay, you know, I'm a Latina woman, and this is what my culture is, and this is really important for me to see, because I'm growing up all around North Americanized, colonized type of media, and so therefore I don't necessarily see that in myself. And it's really interesting because, you know, I'm in my 30s, and so I go on social media now, and there's tons of pages and Instagram profiles, you know, celebrating, you know, that Latinx identity, but I didn't have that growing up. So I'm really happy that those spaces exist. And so us as arts institutions need to create those spaces as well. And so whether that be through social media or through presentation live streams of the arts and the music, we have to build a home for people, no matter where. They have to feel included and find that identity within themselves, but also learn from others too. It's really exciting because within the physical space, when we do our festivals, it's, you know, it's not only just bringing that community within that realm or the surrounding area, but it's also bringing those artists and them meeting each other, them working with each other. We've actually had several times where groups meet and they create these formations, you know, throughout, or, you know, there's also jam sessions that happen and they learn from each other there as well and create this really positive environment. Or they go out and they try new food that they've never seen or heard of before. So just that intermingling is really important within that physical space, but that needs to be continued digitally as well. You're right, it's very important because otherwise, as I said, we're still bombarded with everything that's going on, so that have the resources to do that. And with that, as arts organizations, we have to continue to come together in order to advocate and lobby, essentially, to ensure that we have the resources in place, the grants in place, the funding, et cetera, in order for us to continue to serve our communities and to have these programs accessible.
I think I was muted. Thank you for that, Mercedes. This is, again, also a really awesome answer. The fact, too, that you mentioned the progress in society that has happened, but also specifically the fact that, I mean, you are part of the progress. It's organizations like yours that are making this happen. And we have to keep supporting exactly what you're doing. Yeah, this is great. Also, even the fact that you mentioned really making all arts accessible so that people from all socioeconomic backgrounds are able to, you know, partake in that. That's a very crucial thing as well. So thank you for sharing that. Now, you mentioned jam sessions and just experiences of artists meeting and interacting. And that's also part of the topic of this conversation, really, which is collaboration as well. So could any of you share something about, I guess, you know, the experience of collaborating with artists, could be from similar musical genres or even different genres or culture, and how you feel that has also helped this community building? I'm throwing this one for anyone who wants to talk about it. Who wants to start?
Well, I can start and maybe jump in every once in a while. Yeah, no, I find that, you know, I'm fairly new to the program with Small World, but with Emergence, I'm really excited to see what will happen from it, because even though it just debuted last year, there were 25 artists that came on board. They're all immigrants and refugees, all professional musicians, but new to Canada. And, you know, they were there in order to learn about the Canadian music landscape and learn from producers, funders, promoters, managers, etc., just to get to know it, but also to find other musicians, because it can be pretty lonely if, for example, you come to Canada as a musician and, you know, you're not necessarily going to be a famous musician right away. You might have to take a different job. You might have to, you know, be working away, and you're not necessarily dedicated and support your families. And you might not necessarily be dedicating that time to your music and your art. So it's important to create that space. And so therefore to find each other. So from those 25 musicians, 6 new collaborative musical ensembles were created. And that all happened digitally. And so it will be interesting to see what will happen when they're in the same space at a getaway together, with their musicians in hand and live. And so I've noticed just within, fast festivals at Sunfest, when the musicians come together and they create those jam sessions, it's nothing but a positive experience and something that creates long-lasting memories, not just for us as the presenters, but for them as the musicians. And for them, it's that cross-learning of their culture and their rhythms and their traditional instruments and languages, because it's important that we continue to present this type of music or these types of music. I say non-colonial forms of music, let's put it that way. Because in the end, regardless of language, it's a rhythm, it's a beat that brings us together and that we can always, always come back to and find commonality with. And so with that collective voice of musicians, continuing to support each other, whether it be an audience for each other, whether it be, jamming together and giving, their art and their music and their energy, especially to each other, is so important because it motivates them, it motivates us. And so when it comes to, for example, Global Toronto, we're a music conference, and yeah, we're about business. Let's do some business. Let's make sure that people get gigs and continue their career. But really, it's about the undertone of let's create an equitable industry. Let's create an industry that is sustainable first and foremost. And how do we bring all those voices together in order to learn from each other of how they're doing it? So, for example, we're spotlighting different organizations that happen all around the world because we think what they're doing is amazing. And so we want to make sure that people know about what they're doing. There's different organizations that are coming in that are, fighting for climate justice, or who are, for example, they're continuing to further their work within their own countries. And so we want to make sure that people know about them so that they learn from them and say, hey, I can do that in my country as well. So that collaboration is really important for those, and those networking opportunities are really important for those people within the industry, not just artists, that will continue to do the administrative work, the groundwork, the presentations, the funding, to know, hey, there's other people that are doing what I wish I could be doing, or what that I hope to do later. So it's really important to bring them all together, create those spaces. And yeah, I'll stop it there.
No, I love that. I mean, specifically the fact you've just mentioned networking. I think, what your organization does really is letting people see role models in their communities, and connecting them so that they can learn from these mentors and then, be the next generation to inspire more people. So yeah, this is great. On this question, did anyone else want to jump in, or did we want to talk about something else? Because I have more questions too.
Yeah, I wanna talk about a little bit, aside from the community work that I do, the traditional music that I study, and also the original music that I make. The traditional music that I study is music from the 16th century, and it represents the unity between three different musical traditions. It's called Música de Gaita, and it comes from the Sierra Nevada, which is the world's tallest coastal mountain in the Caribbean coast of present-day Colombia. And the two flutes that I play, traditional flutes, are called queasy boomsies, and they're the original indigenous instruments from that region. But eventually, in the valleys, in the same region, but in the jungle and coastal areas, there's a drumming tradition that has its roots in West Africa. So you have the different palenques, communities that were established when people freed themselves from the sites of slavery and created their own autonomous communities. The drums come from that region, and eventually those two ensembles came together as a result of cross-cultural exchange throughout generations and generations. And then eventually the poetry used in the music is poetic devices from rural areas in Spain, like rhyming couplets and decimas and those sort of things. So this is music that comes from the 16th century, but it's examples of the fact that collaboration and fusion has always existed. And this music gave birth to a new tradition, a new style of music called cumbia, which is also hundreds of years old. And it's a music, it comes from that region, but it's a music that unites nations across Latin America. Every nation in Latin America has their own take on cumbia, and it comes from this region. Also, I've been really inspired by that story, and also by the condor and eagle story that I learned about here in North America. And it's a prophecy that talks about the condor representing the south and the eagle representing the north. And it says that at one point they flew together, but when colonization took place, the condor, went to the south and the eagle went to the north. And the prophecy says that now we're at a time where the two birds are coming back together as the people of those territories begin to awaken collectively and return to their traditional ways of understanding their relationship with the earth, with the stars, with nature, with the traditional languages, traditional instruments. So that is something that I incorporate a lot, and it's something that I try to live by in the original music that I create. So I'm about to put out an album, and the album that I put out earlier that was nominated for a JUNO award. That one, there's many artists that are collaborating from Turtle Island and also from Abya Yala. So in this upcoming album, I have artists from Argentina, from Colombia, indigenous artists from Colombia, from El Salvador, from the United States, from Eastern Canada, Turtle Island, Western Canada, and it's something that is part of my work, is creating those bridges amongst indigenous and mestizo artists from Turtle Island and Abya Yala. And it's work that I'm really proud of. I have a single that I'm gonna that is coming out this Friday with a video, and that one features Classic Roots, who's a really well-known DJ, Anishinaabe DJ, and also DJ Grouch from Panama/Colombia. So and that's an example of collaborations that are happening across different musical genres, and also across borders. So that's my take on that question.
I love that. Just the fact that you're not only, uniting neighborhoods at the local level, but also doing it cross country, internationally. No, this is great. And looking forward to hearing the music. And Menon, did you also want to share something on that topic?
I think my colleagues have said quite a bit, so I'm
okay. Yeah. I have another question for you then. I think I have time for one more question, unless there's anything from the audience, but I'm not sure. Probably not. Okay, I have one more that's very important. And Menon, I'm going to start with you for that one.
Sure.
What are your top pieces of advice for a newcomer and aspiring musicians here?
I think two things. One is there is not a strong tradition in Canada of people being available to mentor. Like, this is not a mentor strong tradition here, and so people are having to do this on their own. So what I would say is, if you see an artist of color, or an artist who is First Nations, or anybody, reach out to those people, because we are the people who are actually making this culture and this environment much more porous and much more supportable. The other thing that I would say is, there's a really important program that the Toronto Arts Council, and this is just for Toronto, but Ontario and Canada Council may have additional programs. There's a newcomer artist program that pairs you up with a leader for 1 year, and you and the leader each receive $5,000, and you can just have unlimited time with this person. You can, and most artists do get some support at some point in their career from the Toronto Arts Council. So what I would do is just start right away. And I have to say, I'm somebody who's available on most social media platforms. If people are curious and connecting with me, I'm easy to find, but there are tons of people. There's also a program that I'll just mention real quick called the Cultural Leaders Lab. They've been around for 5 or 6 years now. All those people are Googleable. Reach out to those folks. There's lots of people. The Toronto Arts Council has been very mindful of having a very diverse group in that program. So reach out, and you'd be surprised what a good mentor can do. When I came back, I didn't know anybody and had been away for quite some time. And I met a guy who was had been a big art supporter over many decades. He got me connected to a foundation. He got me on TV. He opened so many doors for me. So this is a place that's waiting for you to ask for help, and there's lots of people willing to help. So that would be my advice.
Thank you for sharing that. So essentially, number one, the importance of a good mentorship, and number two, actually, reaching out and trying to apply to all these available programs that really support people. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Mercedes, same question for you. What would be your top pieces of advice for newcomer artists?
I think those two were excellent. I would definitely echo those. But just to add on, I would say attend and support the events whenever you can. And I find that that's a big thing that sometimes artists won't necessarily support other artists, and it's a bit frustrating to see that sometimes. Not everyone, of course, but many do. So I would say go and attend the events that you find out, like do your research and take a look, because it's important to give that audience, be that audience, but also learn from those other artists as well, just as Menon mentioned. But I would say go and attend them, and if you feel that you can't afford it, just message the presenter. I'm sure they'd be happy to let you in.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Yeah, the importance of not only expecting support for yourself, but also going out there and supporting your fellow community members as well. No, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And Ruben, same question for you. If there's more advice you'd like to share on that topic as well.
I agree 100% with what's been said. Attending as much as you can to the different activities, rehearsals, events, networking, getting to know, the community, getting to know, the different groups, the different cultural organizations, and also the funding bodies that exist.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you to all three of you for this awesome discussion. And I think Paola is going to close the event. But this was great. Very insightful.
Thank you for your mentorship too, Anthony.
Thank you very much to everyone who had engaged in this conversation and that are actually watching this live stream. And this is it's being recorded to be uploaded in our YouTube channel. But I want to take a moment to express my gratitude to Anthony for facilitating this space, as we have these very talented and also powerhouses in the music industry as well. I want to express my gratitude to you three, Ruben, Mercedes, and Menon, for your presence here, for your brilliance, for your leadership. We have so many stories together, from like Ruben is from the same community of, we are Colombian diaspora. Menon is someone who I met 5 years ago, and I always share this story because it's very important to express gratitude. And the first person that actually believed in this project happening was Menon. When I went to his office at 9:18 and I told him about this idea, there was this dream, and I'm this stubborn person that I want to do this regardless. And so Menon shared so many ideas from the administrative and perspective, and also said, well, still we're going to have a space for this to be able to happen. And this is how happening started in 2016 or 2017. Now I don't remember the year, but Menon is a crucial person in this process, and I want to express my gratitude publicly, because I think this is part of the process of what you have been saying, and it's being able to be there for each other, to show up to each other, and also to create spaces of abundance when we are having to work in industries that work from places of precarity, where we have to compete for resources, where we have to kind of put attention to what is there and make sure that other people don't get close to it because there is limitation of resources. So what I had witnessed and I had experience with the three of you panelists, and of course with Anthony, I have been working and in contact with Anthony for a year now, is that we work, that's the reason why there is synergy. It is the fact that we work from places of true collaboration, of true interest, that everybody gets to their full potential and reaches their goals. And I think that is extremely important when we talk about collective voice. and particularly collective voice in music, in the music industry. Once again, we are extremely grateful for your presence, and this was an amazing opportunity to put this knowledge and this wisdom all together. So we are thankful for your presence at Happening Multicultural Festival. Kel and Sam were the two amazing ASL interpreters for this afternoon. We're very thankful for your presence as well, and for supporting us and making sure that our conversations reach out more communities. We're extremely grateful for that. As we mentioned at the very beginning, we have dedicated this event to Jorge Lopez, and we wish him a full recovery very soon. Our gratitude to you all, and stay tuned for more events of Happening Multicultural Festival. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.